So Kevin McCarthy and Joe Biden met in the White House yesterday. Here's Kevin McCarthy, House Speaker, after that meeting.
The president, he said that he's willing to cut spending, but he also wants to raise revenue as well. Are you willing to talk about that?
No. Just to be clear, why? When you talk about raising revenue, if you look at the 50-year average of America, how much money have we brought in by revenue? That would be roughly about 17% of GDP. Right now, we're bringing almost 20% of GDP in revenue. Now, how many times has that happened in modern history? Only twice, in 1944 and in 2000. So you're bringing in more money at a higher percentage than any other time.
Can you explain, first of all, that was his reaction right outside of the White House, but we have a thread, Ryan. Could you break this down, I think, for the audience? Let's put it up there on the screen. These are just about what exactly the GOP wants, and can you put it in plain English for everybody?
So basically what Republicans are saying is that spending increased significantly under the Biden administration, so therefore it's unfair to say that we're going to do the normal cost of living inflation adjustments because we did such significant bumps over the last couple of years, so therefore we need to spend less. And that's the thing that might get Republicans hung up completely, is that, and you can move to the next one so people, if they want to read this while we're talking, they're saying, Republicans are saying we want to spend absolutely less, like not just as a percentage, not just a slower rate of growth, but less than the year before.
Nominal.
Right. And they want to spend more on the Pentagon. So if you want to give more to the military and you want to give less overall, then you have to give a huge amount less. And if you have already agreed accidentally in a State of Union not to touch Medicare and Social Security, that limits you to discretionary spending, which is
less
like,
than what?
That's like the
10% of the budget.
It's like the EPA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, it's veterans. A lot of that is veterans, which is what is also getting Republicans hung up because they're like, oh, no, of course we're not going after veterans. Like, okay, so you keep saying there's all these things you're not going after, and that leaves them with, SNAP.
Yep.
And then they want to go after some of the climate tax credits in IRA, and for Biden, that's a red line. And he wouldn't have the votes for that in the House or Senate anyway. And so then they're stuck. Now they're back to okay, what can we do about food stamps again? And then they're going to say, and we're only going to do work requirements for able-bodied people without dependents.
Okay.
The number of people getting food stamps in that situation is very slim.
Really?
And the amount they get is like $19 or something.
Okay.
$20 a month.
So this is where he's talking about, if we can go to, they're talking about both are agreeing on permitting reform. This is one where I'm pretty pro permitting reform, Ryan. Can you steel man?
Yes.
Okay, I was gonna say, can you at least steel man where I am on this? Because I don't think people understand this. It has to do with, it's framed by its detractors as just about oil. But it's not just about oil. It has to do with all clean energy. And so as somebody who is very anti the current regulatory regime around wind, solar, and nuclear, especially nuclear, permitting reform to me actually does look like an incredibly good idea. But maybe explain it to why people are opposed.
So, I'm a kind of a heretic on this.
Right.
But to make the argument against permitting reform, what people say is like, look, they're already telling us we have 5 or 10 years to cap emissions at what are already catastrophic levels that are putting humanity at risk, like of an existential crisis. Like that's the argument. And there's a lot of climate science that says, actually, that could be right. And that if you do permitting reform that is geared toward the fossil fuel industry, and the fact that API, the American Petroleum Institute, left its watermark on Joe Manchin's permitting reform, really poisoned the well,
explain that for people.
So to speak. So oftentimes legislation is written on K Street by lobbyists, and Newt Gingrich helped bring this about in 1994. When he took over, he gutted the amount of staff that the public had. So the public gets what it pays for. And so members of Congress outsource a lot of their legislative writing to K Street. So the American Petroleum Institute wrote Joe Manchin's permitting reform legislation, put their watermark on it, and forgot to take it off when they circulated.
So what is your pro case for permitting reform?
So the pro case is that we have learned from recent inflation politics and also from the Yellow Vest protests in France that turning around climate politics by forcing working class people to pay more for energy is just maybe in an ideal world where you're an authoritarian and you can just crush all dissent, you can do it, but it's not going to work. It's going to produce popular revolt and your policies are going to be repealed. So what's the point of trying to force through a policy that's just going to get repealed amid anger? The only way you're going to get there is if renewables and clean energy can compete
and are cheap
and are cheaper than fossil fuels.
Right.
And so you're not going to be able to keep everything in the ground by force. The way you're going to keep things in the ground is the way you're keeping coal in the ground now in the United States, which is companies look at it and they're like, it's not worth the money it takes to dig that out of the ground.
Yeah, it's cheaper to burn natural gas. And
so we'll
no one is saying natural gas is great, but it's a hell of a lot better than coal.
And so the argument for permitting reform is you can't get enough wind, solar, geothermal, and other renewables online at scale in order to drive the price down. If every single neighborhood can look at a transmission line and say, you know what, we'd prefer actually not to have a transmission line. Oh, really? That's interesting. That's surprising. We've never met anybody who would, rather not have, construction in their backyard.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, guess what? That's our choice.
Yeah.
No, and if we want to have 9 billion people on the planet who are using this much energy, we're going to have to get the energy from somewhere.
This is important for people to get because this is like one of the biggest wars in Washington right now. And that's another reason why I was pretty annoyed with Biden whenever he phrased it as like some massive giveaway to the oil industry. Sometimes the two things can be true. Industry can want something, it can also still be good, whenever it comes to cost. And like what you're laying out here, the way our regulatory regime, I've talked about this before in terms of like nuclear reactors. Like we haven't had a new nuclear reactor built in the United States, or at least has come online in the United States since the 1970s. There's one currently in the works. Allegedly, it took way too long to build, and it cost way too much money. Now, some of that is definitely on the companies itself. A lot of it, though, is also on the government. And there's some crazy breakthrough technology happening right now in the world of nuclear reactors. They're looking at them that are so small they can fit literally inside of a truck. I mean, nuclear fission technology, and most of it is happening, the research, not in the US. And it's specifically because they don't think they can do business here. Unfortunately, the Europeans, while they sometimes have a better permitting regime, they also are anti-nuclear ideologically. And so we're really not seeing the uptake on this in the world's most developed economies. The Asians are the ones instead who are like, hey, come over here, except Japan. Now Japan is out also.
Yeah, because they had a little bit of a situation.
Right. Well, it was their fault. Okay, and I'll maintain that. But that was 100% on them. The problem, though, also, Ryan, is that the way that this all fits is, as I understand it, this is a major Republican priority, but they are also not willing to trade on some revenue raisers. And this is where, let me call out the Republicans here, because this stuff drives me absolutely crazy. They specifically shot down closing the carried interest loophole, which is literally only beneficial for people who work in private equity and venture capital who are multi-millionaires, just so they don't have to pay a tax, which is equivalent to income tax like you or I or anybody else would, and can pay dramatically lower on their millions of profits. So, let's be clear. That's number one. Number two, where they're talking about here is wonky, but it's about pharmacy benefit managers. Yeah. Can you explain that one to people?
And these are the new folks who are really in the crosshairs of everybody in Washington.
Because scum of the earth.
Insurance companies and drug makers, who are some of the two of the most powerful lobbies in Washington, were like, who can we take out?
Right.
It's like, it's the pharmacy benefit managers. And these are the folks who are basically middlemen and are negotiating.
All they do is add costs. Right. That is literally all they do, is add cost to prescription drug.
And it's yes, sure. Nuke the pharmacy benefit manager. It's not going to save everything, but it'll do something.
Right.
And it's hilarious because the public is clamoring for something, and the insurance industry and the pharmaceutical industry are like, here's something you can do. Yeah, and finally Congress is like, yes, sir.
Yes, and there was a really funny part, Ryan, here, that we were talking about yesterday. Let's put it up there on the screen, about how there is a growing sense of regret within Democratic ranks that the party missed an opportunity to neutralize the debt limit when they fully controlled Congress and White House for 2 years. Oh, yeah. You think?
Whoops.
What a stupid idea. My favorite part, Ryan, is that the best it's been explained to me, the reason why they didn't do it is because they would have had to put a number on it. Yes. And by putting a number on it, they thought that would be a bad headline. So they were not willing to sacrifice one bad headline for having to now cut all the programs that they passed while they were in office. And look, the ball is in the Republicans' court. There's no question. I mean, they are completely controlling the playbook here. You know, Biden and all of them have bent the knee almost in every way. Speaker McCarthy also spoke at the Capitol yesterday after he returned from the White House. Let's take a listen to what he said.
So what we would like to do is sit down. We have to spend less than we spent last year. And you got to know why. The Democrats spent $6 trillion. That brought us inflation, more dependent on China. We've had 3 of the biggest 4 banks failures just in the last couple months. So what we want to do is limit the amount of spending that we could do in the future, about 1%. That is an idea by Joe Manchin. Get our supply chain working again, so work requirements for only able-bodied people with no dependents.
Okay, so what do you get from that, Ryan, is that he's drawing it out, like he said, able-bodied people. But the problem is, I just don't see how you reach the overall top-line numbers here. So I think that the TLDR is we're trying to explain to everybody here, like, what exactly they want, what the White House doesn't want, and the consequences, I mean, we've talked about ad nauseum at this point, but are very grave. From what I have seen, one current estimate says 1.5 million people could lose their job within just the first 48 hours, that we would have Medicare and Social Security payments that would stop on June 8th if they let the crisis drag on, not to mention a very likely market drop of some 20% or so on the S&P 500. But here's the other thing. Nobody knows. Absolutely nobody knows how it would go. Even the 14th Amendment now and all of the consideration on that stuff, it's up in the air because Biden decided that he wouldn't do it, and now it's maybe on the table. So overall, it's a very chaotic situation, and it's not good. Where do you think things will progress from now?
I think it depends on what Republicans are willing to say yes to, because I think that Democrats, if Biden agrees to something, there will be enough Democrats that you get 100, you maybe get 100 Democrats in the House to go with it. So what's your sense on how many Republicans there are who would take a deal that is good for them? Let's say you're freezing spending and you've got 2 years worth of caps, and then you can fight it out in the next election. Against what the status quo was. It's a huge win, but it's not everything they wanted. Do you think that there will be a revolt? That seems to be the big question.
I don't know. There's no question. The other idea that I heard floated to me by somebody was, hey man, I don't think we'll devolve. They'll probably just do some 1-month extension or something like that to September, which, I mean, it's possible. I'm not so sure though that the far right people, like the Freedom Caucus type people in the House would go for that. So I genuinely don't know. I don't know what they would be willing to agree to.
They could get an extension, like Democrats would vote for an extension.
Dems would definitely vote for an extension, and it's possible they could say, look, the other thing is, and I kind of said this to Crystal yesterday, is I really think that nobody's going to budge until the markets crash. I think something's got to really crash. That was, by the way, I kept wondering, why do they keep holding these meetings at 4:30 p.m. or 5:30 p.m.? Somebody looked at me like it was an idiot, and I was like, duh, Saagar, they don't want the markets to crash. And I was like, oh, that's so obvious. That actually makes complete sense. So the reason why, everyone, if you're wondering why these are taking place later in the day, is because they have to wait until markets close so that there's no reaction to what they do.
Poor Biden, he's like, 4 o'clock, man, I'm done.
Yeah, I know. The guy never works past 4:30. That's why I was shocked. I said, since when does Biden have a 5:30 p.m. meeting on his calendar? But yeah, this apparently is the answer.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.